welcome to our inaugural episode of our new podcast series, Alumni Voices. Today's episode will feature TC alumna Charo Uceda, Dr. Sonya Douglass Horsford, and TC students Krystal Hardy Allen and Mariana Casellato. And I'm your host, Rosella Garcia, the Senior Director of Alumni Relations. So our featured alumna today is Charo Uceda, who is an author, educator, and entrepreneur whose ventures span many industries. In 1988, she founded the Uceda School with her father and sister. They teach English and equip students to compete in the global marketplace. She developed the school's curriculum, penned the Charo Uceda English series, a set of textbooks and workbooks, as well as the Charo Uceda English at Home series of textbooks. Charo has remained close to TC since her graduation, and she has served on the President's Advisory Council since 2009. Last year, she created the Charo Uceda Women's Empowerment Lecture Series, which has been described by fellow administrators as a perfect example of her commitment to supporting scholarship, all while creating a space where we can not only learn from one another, but also find our own inner sources of empowerment and use that to propel ourselves forward. So Charo, can you tell me a bit more about why creating this lecture series has been so important to you?
So the lecture series was conceived in my heart. Through the years, I have come, like all of us, through a journey that bring me from seeing and not understanding to seeing and ignoring, because my priorities took me in a different direction and I simply didn't pay attention. But as the years go by, you start looking back and you start reflecting more. And came to TC, I was already an adult and I had my business growing and it was already a big machinery. But my desire to get education, to be able to have the gift of education, and I chose TC and TC chose me back. And I started to absorb TC's philosophy, and that is philosophy of reflection. As I continue in TC and I continue working, learning the subject matter, but better yet, maturing in what it is, I felt that, I needed to get involved with those things that were important to me. And when I looked around, I saw the need for empowerment for women. Why? Because I left my country and I came here, and this country gave me everything. It gave me opportunity. It gave me the resources. It gave me the ability to interact with wonderful leaders and people and immigrants from every place of the world. And they all had the same thing in common, the desire to have a better life, to create a better life for them and for the ones around them. So I think that women have tremendous strength, and we have compassion and we have determination. And I think that what we need is to just be helped. If we are helped to become strong, then we're going to help everybody else, our children, our relatives, our community at large, our government. So all these just brought me to the point of, how do I use the best platform? And the best platform is definitely TC. TC is the world, because we have a great amount of diversity in our halls that brings students from all walks of life, from all parts of the globe, and we impact the lives of so many millions of people and children, because those students come and they experience TC, they grow with TC, and they go back to wherever it is that they came from, and they do great work. I want empowerment to to be one of the most important things, and not relegated to empowerment of women. What I want is to create an atmosphere with women and men equally share the opportunity to be greater leaders. This world is men and women. This world is not only men, and this world is not only women. So we need to empower women to make sure that we are an even better complement to the beautiful men that are all out there.
Well, thank you very much for that additional context, Charo. Joining us now is TC's own Dr. Sonya Douglass Horsford, Associate Professor of Education Leadership. Her research focuses on the politics of race in education leadership, policy, and reform. She is the founding director of the Black Education Research Collective and co-director of the Urban Education Leaders Program, which is an EDD program for aspiring urban district leaders. So let's listen in on their conversation.
Very nice meeting you.
Very nice to meet you.
I had the chance to read a little bit about you, your beliefs, and your passion for diversity, and the challenges that come with it are so strong and so clearly identified. So kudos to you.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that very much. And I had the chance to learn more about you and the important work that you're doing. So it's really an honor to have this time with you.
So Sonia, we got to hear a little bit about Charo's background and what sort of drives her passion. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up at Teachers College and doing this important work that you're doing right now.
I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada, originally, a first-generation college student. I had actually pursued my bachelor's degree in television broadcasting and communications and journalism at Colorado State, and then had decided I would never go back home to Las Vegas. Graduated and went back home to Las Vegas and worked at a television station there. And then ended up getting an opportunity to work for city government. I was asked to apply for a public information officer position and did that. Became really interested in local politics. And then I pursued my master's in public administration because we had a tuition program at City Hall. And did that, and always knew that I wanted to make change through education. My mother is an immigrant. She's Korean and came to this country and really instilled a commitment to education in me, as well as my father, who didn't get a chance to go to university but went to the Air Force. And then decided that I wanted to keep going on and earn my doctorate in educational leadership. And at that point, I really had a vision of, developing my own school in the way that I thought would be needed, particularly for African American children. And then I, realized how hard it is to start a school and learned more about all of the systems and structures and a lot of the barriers to creating, vibrant educational communities that are inclusive and that support the students that tend to struggle in our schools. And then I became interested in research. I had an advisor who, asked if I had ever considered a position in higher education, and I hadn't, but started attending conferences. She nominated me for a program for scholars of color in education leadership because the field has typically been white men, and really fell in love with that. And it's funny that critical race theory is such a topic now because that was an area that I kind of explored independently during my doctoral studies and has continued to shape my work today. And it's really, I think there's a lot of, mystique around critical race theory, but it's really just acknowledging the histories and legacies of racism and inequality in U.S. law, policies, and practices. And so that's something that I have used to really shape my work in looking at schools and looking at environments that leaders create in schools, whether or not they're welcoming, whether or not they're structured in ways that really provide support to all of the children and families in a particular school community. And then also having, I think, those of us who conduct research think about how we talk about race and what we mean by it and how we theorize it, and beginning to really be clear about distinctions between race, which is really how others label and categorize us, as opposed to culture, which are the identities that we embrace and take up and how we identify ourselves. And I think that's an important way for us to really think about race and culture in the context of education, because on one hand, there are these oppressive systems and structures that we know can really limit access and opportunity for certain students based on their class, race, gender, et cetera. But then there's also the question of culture and how that shows up in schools. Some would argue that education is a cultural transmission process, that is the point of it. And so now the question becomes whose culture will be presented and offered and expected to be modeled in the school environment. So those are the things that I've been really interested in. I feel like we need to think in collaborative ways to come up with solutions to address inequality, because for me, it seems that we continue to have the same conversations and that we have to confront, I think, some of the tough truths around racism, around the history of the country. And we're in a moment where that's happening. So the question now becomes, for those who call themselves leaders in particular, what is our responsibility right now? Who needs to be thinking about these things, I guess, on a macro scale? And what role can each of us play to advance an agenda that really is inclusive and creates, these loving, supportive educational communities that I believe we can create with the talent that we have?
Well, I think that TC is already doing that through the style of delivering curriculum, through the style that they use in order to make the students the focus of the discussion. We are not prescribers. Our students should think we are the ones that empower them to have and to shape their own thinking, but we show them how to get sources to inform them in the proper way, because that's very important. The delivery of the curriculum inside the classroom, it has been dedicated to the interaction and exchange of ideas in a way that there is discussion, that there is difference of opinions, in order to make sure that they understand that they have to know what their ideas are and how to articulate them and to expose them to others in order to make sure that they prove a point. And that point needs to be a valid one. So I think that TC prepares them in order for them to be leaders from the first day that they cross those doors.
I think the practice of critical thinking is really important and something that we practice at TC. And to Charo's point, it's not about prescribing what to do, but it's about giving people the information that they need to make decisions about what they realize they now have to do as a result of observing and being faced with the realities of inequality or of injustice. And I just think that is the most powerful way of getting people to understand the need to engage in activism to expand equality and opportunity for everyone. And so I find that it's not about, again, trying to tell people how to be equitable or culturally relevant. But if I tell you more about the history of certain communities in this country and what they have experienced and how that's shaped educational experiences and perhaps outcomes, then I think it actually changes the way that students and educators, view that problem and spark curiosity so that individuals want to increase their knowledge to better understand how to address the issue. So that's, to me, the really important and valuable part is understanding in very deep ways the problem that you are trying to solve.
So I'd like to come back to this idea of empowerment, right? The whole lecture series is based on empowerment, based on finding our own power, our own voice, and also giving voice to others. So how can we teach educators to empower their students? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
My philosophy in life is always that the best way to empower somebody is to believe in the inner strengths of the person, and also to understand the person and their challenges according to their own life experiences. I can only empower somebody that I can understand. I can only empower somebody that I can feel what their experiences were and how those experiences shaped their feelings and their thinking. I want to know more about others' experiences, put myself in their shoes, try to listen to their stories. In that understanding, they will feel that I want to help, that I want to give them the nurturing that they need in order to believe that they are strong, that they can do things that they probably never thought they could. Young people need that help, they need that support. I believe that we need to believe in them. And when you empower somebody in that way, they get strength and they feel that they have confidence in what their heart tells them.
I would agree. I think that the connections to others is really important to empowerment. That through working together in collaboration with others, that we can then be strengthened, that others can pour into us, and that allows us to also experience empowerment in ways that maybe we can't do alone. And especially for students, I think, there's a lot of discussion around imposter syndrome, for example, and the sense that you may not know enough, or you may not be good enough, or that someone's going to find out that you didn't really belong at this elite institution, that can actually, I think, limit our capacity to really use our power, or to make us think that we really don't have any. And so it's important that we encourage one another, that we realize that we do know enough, that we are good enough, that we probably have more skills that are necessary to even advance the work that we want to do. And so by working collaboratively, by asking questions together, by pushing one another and holding each other accountable to act, that in and of itself can be an empowering process. And to Charo's point, begin to have a ripple effect where you've now empowered yourself and others, and have this army, if you will, to make the change and sustain it.
Why is it so critical that we think about teaching and preparing educators to be effective teachers in a way that instills a sense of empowerment, and also a sense of duty within those educators to instill this empowerment within their students as well?
Well, I would say that teaching has really been a joy, but also a really important opportunity to engage research and dialogue with the students that I have the honor of teaching. I teach courses on education reform, the social context of education and reform, as well as right now I'm teaching a course on Black education in the post-civil rights era, where we're looking at COVID and systemic racism and how it has also impacted the education of Black students. And I think in those spaces, because of the students that we have at TC who come to TC because they are really interested in learning how they can make an impact and want to better understand the challenging and complex issues around educational equality, that the classroom becomes really a generative space for thinking about what we do in many ways. And so I would say over the last few semesters, it's really turned into, conversations about how we can enact change and what needs to happen to do that, which is exciting in many ways. I mean, it's, again, shifting from the traditional ways that we think about courses and coursework and learning. But in many ways, it's also the beautiful intersection of research, teaching, and advocacy that I think TC does such an amazing job with, and that providing that space and those conditions, that the sky's the limit in terms of what we can do when we work together. And so having those conversations informed by research even makes them, I think, all the more powerful, and allows us to not only, change practices, but change the ideas that inform our practices. It's interesting because as a faculty member in education leadership, the role has become so much more controlled by outside forces, right? So it's all of the policies, all of the requirements, all of the evaluation and accountability that comes from the outside, that the points that you raise about your heart, your purpose, your North Star in many ways, becomes an afterthought because you literally can't keep that position without keeping up with and maintaining and meeting the needs of all of the other pressures on you. And so I just wonder, and I think about this often, what the role of leaders, you know, in education and beyond are to think about how we really change those systems, right? To free up the ways that leaders can really lead, and to find ways to get rid of a lot of the restrictions, you know, that I think do confine the very passionate educators that we do have, but that aren't really able to flourish and live out their purpose because of how structures, you know, really constrain them. So I wonder if you have thoughts on that, and because many of our students, you know, are confronted with that in their jobs and in their daily lives.
But it will always be a fight. It will always be a struggle. But we need to understand that that's why we exist. Since the dawn of times, humans have had different ways of looking at things, and they have motivations behind whatever it is that they are pursuing. And in many, many, many occasions, those motivations are self-interest. And very few times it includes the interest of the community, of the rest of the people, because we have that tendency. We have to understand that it is a human tendency. So we need to continue working for our young to understand that it's okay. It will always happen for as long as we let it happen. So our work will be to voice our opinions, but with a very strong compass. Because when you're not strong inside, the winds will take you in any direction. So I think that TC have the great opportunity as well as the great responsibility to nurture the students. As I say, subject matter is important, but at the core of what we do is really to align the hearts and the minds.
There's always hope. There's always hope.
Well, I believe that the youth, we always talk about the young and we always say, you're the future. And I think we are wrong at telling them you're the future. Well, they are the present, because what they do now impacts now. I believe that decades ago, for some reason, all of us thought that whatever young people did would impact us in the future. I think that that was a very wrong way to see it. It impacts us now.
Right.
And what they do and how they do it and how passionate they are, it's very important, because without passion, you can't get anything done. You must be involved for the long haul, and you have to be involved on a constant basis. It has to be a devotion to the cause. Otherwise, it may end in one conversation, and it is a process that probably will never end, because human beings tend to always try to see other people outside and other people as the insiders. And we need to obviously go against that human trait, and we need to emphasize that we are all the same.
So what are some of the ways that you think we can do that, particularly for aspiring education leaders?
Well, I think that one of the first things is to understand what is the source of our passion, because there are people who may not understand yet what is close to their hearts and very poignant in their minds. Because with this world giving you so many different options and misinformation, it's easy to get confused, to lose focus. I think that the first thing that I did that was very important is to go inward before I can even look at outside, because I need to find out what is dear to me, what is justice to me, what is. I think that is a good start, and understanding that it needs to be a lifetime commitment, because it cannot just be a seasonal endeavor. We need to understand that the fight will take us a lifetime, and we may feel that we have advanced, and then something happens and we are back 100 years ago again. Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again, right? So then history shows us that the fight and the energy has to be a lifetime endeavor, commitment, a promise to ourselves that we are not going to let go. And I think that, much of that will rest on the shoulders of the ones who want to be part of the activism. We need to make sure that it is not about how far we go. It is how many people I can bring with me. So the advancement cannot be based on me. It needs to be based on how many more people can come with me. And activism is the only way, because passivism, we all know it's not. So it's a very simple choice. Either you are active or you're passive. There's no in between.
Right.
So
not voting is a vote, right? Or not engaging is, that's how you choose.
Exactly. So it is a simple choice, and it's a choice that all our students and all members of society have at some point. And well, it's something that we need to make sure that our students understand.
Okay, so we're here. What do we do now to protect our democracy?
Well, I think it is important right now to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to be counted and to use our voice in every way possible. And that includes completing your census form and making sure that everyone that you know, your family members, your school communities understand the importance of that, because it determines how resources will be allocated for the next 10 years, as well as representation. The other thing we want to do is make sure that you're registered to vote. Voting is actually underway in several states currently, and so make sure that you're registered, make sure that you request your ballot, and make sure that you vote. And then make sure you engage in self-care, because there will probably be, it may take time to figure out what has happened after Election Day. And so I think it's being vigilant. Again, doing the most that we can before that day is important. And so if you can volunteer as a poll worker, if you can, again, assist to make sure that the process of democracy is being meted out the way that it needs to be, then I think we can all rest better on November 3rd.
So what comes next? What is the work that needs to be done starting November 4th, regardless of the outcome of these elections?
We need to continue the organizing, establishing a vision, developing a strategy to implement it. No matter who the new president and their administration is, we need to be at the table in terms of defining what the policy agenda is for education, particularly around issues of equity and justice. So it's not enough to, voting is important, but it's not enough. We still have to engage in the process, make our voices heard. And I think the more that we can articulate a clear agenda for what we expect from our schools, we'll be in a better position to advocate for them and make sure that we get our children, our teachers, and our leaders what they need to be successful.
I say, keep the enthusiasm, because this is not only a thing that it's going to pass. This is with us, and it needs to stay with us for the rest of our lives. Presidents come and go, administrations come and go, but the only constant that we will have is our communities. those communities remain, and those communities will be even better or worse, and hopefully they will be better with our contributions. So I would ask everyone to call their friends, call your relatives, talk to the people that you make acquaintances with, and tell them that they need to vote, that they need to have the enthusiasm, because complacency is a bad ingredient in life. And I think that that is where we are at with our students. How are they going to be involved in creating that atmosphere where we welcome those who want to be part of the team in helping others?
I agree too. I'm actually in the process of trying to organize students to engage in more advocacy work. Just with the list of students that have over the years expressed an interest, they say, what can we do right now? And so we're having an interest meeting tonight, kind of interested to see what types of things they want to take up in this moment. But there is this sense of, anxiety, of uncertainty, but also a desire to act. It's really, again, this idea of bringing people together in community, just to come into the space with the passion, with questions, with curiosity, with a sense of wanting to do good work. And so with enough interest around that, we just wanted to see what problems they've already identified and solutions that they may already have, and how we can support one another to address them. So I'm really excited about that. A project that I have is the Black Education Research Collective, which was established a couple of years ago. And so we have a group of students that are really interested in learning more about Black communities and educational leadership in particular. And then we also have a large group of students that are interested in the politics of equity and diversity. And so as we talk more about critical race theory, whiteness, all of the topics that have really become a part of the political conversation now, we want to, explore that further. What do these terms mean? How do they show up in educational practices? How do we know that we are truly equity leaders? What does that look like? And so I'm really excited about, again, having that space to ask those questions and then have the students determine what they do about it. Do you conduct perhaps additional research to get answers to this set of questions? Is it an action project? Is there work that you need to do with a parent advocacy group right now? Is there a group of teachers in a school that you can provide professional development or pro bono support to? So again, I don't know. I think many of those things will probably emerge, but really excited again to kind of hear where people are and how they feel they can use their power. That's a really exciting thing to have in terms of being in conversation with students who have that passion, but also I think trying to make sure it's directed in a way that produces the results that you say that you want, right? Bill Lucy, who was a well-known union, he organized actually the sanitation workers in Memphis during the days of King, and I had the chance to meet with him. And well, it wasn't to meet with him, I sat next to him and then I just asked him about 100 questions. One of his famous quotes is that it's better to be effective than to be right. I just think that is an important message again, because we want to be right, we want to prove our point. But at the end of the day, there are less people who are homeless as a result of the work that you've done. Are there more people who have jobs and can support their families? Are the schools, better resourced as a result of the work that we're doing as opposed to being right? And so I think this moment has invited, I think, more attention to people being willing to maybe give up being right and focusing more on, the impact on us collectively. And so while it has been painful to endure the last 3.5 years, I feel very hopeful and energized around how this moment has forced us to focus on what it means to have a democracy.
I think that that's one of the things that TC has a wonderful opportunity to shape the minds of those wonderful students, and many of them don't need any help. Many of them are leaders in their own right already. So we need to also be part of giving them a platform, so that way they can they can use that energy and those values to move forward.
We're working on it. So I agree wholeheartedly that now is the time, and I certainly want to use whatever platform I can to help that.
Well, you know what? We only want to plant a seed. That's all we can do, and that's probably the best thing we can do, and that is important.
We know that Charo feels strongly about keeping TC students front and center. So we had a chance to catch up with a couple of Dr. Douglass Horsford's former students who had already been engaging in advocacy efforts even before arriving at TC. But in our discussions, they revealed they've already found that their time at Teachers College has had a significant impact on their work and the way they carry out those advocacy efforts. So let's hear more.
I am Krystal Hardy Allen. I am a native of historic Selma, Alabama. I am a first-generation college graduate, the daughter of a carpenter and school bus driver, and the granddaughter actually of a sharecropper in rural Alabama. I am currently the founder and the chief executive officer of an education and management consulting firm that works internationally within 5 countries to provide professional development services and thought leadership to schools, nonprofits, and businesses. So myself and a team of 7 other colleagues are based in New Orleans, but we provide workshops, coaching, strategic planning, and also curriculum and framework design in South Africa, Nigeria, India, South Korea, and here in the US. Prior to graduate studies here at Teachers College, of which I'm in the Urban Education Leaders Program as a doctoral student right now, I was a school principal, actually of a elementary and middle school campus here in the state of Louisiana. And before that, a vice principal, instructional coach, and a teacher. So my work is definitely that of a practitioner, but led a lot of social justice education work with Black and Brown students my entire career, and a lot of work reimagining and challenging the idea of what community and family engagement should actually look like.
So I'm Mariana Casellato. I'm originally from Brazil, from São Paulo, Brazil. And I'm in a second year master's student in the International Educational Development Program right now, starting my second year. And I come from a background of work with non-governmental organizations and NGOs and social movements in Brazil. So when I was very young, when I was 10, I founded an NGO called Projeto Cala a Boca Já Morreu, which in English is No More Silencing. And the idea was to produce communication workshops when I was a kid, I was the one producing communication. So we had a weekly 2-hour radio show on a community radio station back where I lived. And we started doing that with other kids as well as I grew up. So we started this network around the country, giving workshops on communication production for kids and teenagers initially, and connecting that with other subjects and in a way of promoting social participation of kids. So they were recording their ideas, their perspectives on different subjects and participating in events that were mainly for adults. So I've been working a lot with that and being close to social movements as I did that. Right now I'm at TC, bringing all of that practical knowledge into theory. And I'm an intern at AC4, which is Earth Institute department that works with sustainability, conflict, and complexity. I produce their podcast.
Wow, I must say I'm really impressed with all that you've done before even getting to TC. It's truly inspiring. So well done. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your time at TC has already started to transform your way of thinking, or maybe how it is manifested in your current endeavors?
I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to study, and I already had a lot of contact with social movements and with grassroots organizations, because throughout this years producing communication, what we did was started to participate on different events on public policy and have, our youth or children's voice be heard in those spaces by politicians from different levels, and understand that we as children and youth were totally capable of doing politics because we also experience the world. Therefore, we have opinions about it. And why are our opinions not valued when discussing public policy, right? So I wanted to study youth and specifically environmental education because that's what we most focused on. When I got to TC, it was interesting because this very, I don't know, a lot of the ways of thinking and knowing that I had known from my background, I didn't really find translated in the curriculum. So I was missing some other voices, you know, so voices from other countries, more diverse perspectives. And that really led me to focus my study on decolonization. I had already got acquainted with that area of studies back in Brazil. And when I got here, that interest just grew. I started, you know, participating on different groups here in the college that discuss this topic. And there are some very good professors who connected me with very interesting resources that led into what I just created recently. So as an AC4 intern producing the podcast, I was in touch gladly with a professor from Rwanda who was interested in producing an episode about the intersections between COVID-19 and colonialism. By being a practitioner in an African country, her and a friend of hers who works here in the US in humanitarian, they had this perspective that there was a lot of issues that should be addressed that had to do with colonial structures in the COVID response. And we put forth the efforts to create a 3-episode series on colonialism and COVID-19. And we've talked with Zimbabwe health practitioners, with a Navajo historian, with a Somali policy health practitioner as well. And we're still going to talk to journalists from Liberia and Brazil, exchanging information about how colonialism is shaping the COVID response in those contexts. And it's really very interesting because even though we can imagine those are very different contexts, they are very similar on their history, in some elements of their history and how they have been shaped historically by colonialism. So it has been a great opportunity to be able to do this here. And I think something that really very rich from where I stand right now is the possibility of connecting people from such different contexts in the world in this product of communication. So it's been like very great, and it has expanded my perspectives in the podcast and even in the discussion group. So there are people from all over the world that can give me their decolonizing perspectives. Only in an university like this, I think I was able to really access that.
Teachers College has pushed my thinking to understand systems leadership and systems change and what it means to really analyze those things, you know, and understand what happens at the macro level. I think as a teacher and even as a principal, my lens was more micro. It was very classroom specific or building specific, and to a certain extent thinking about my immediate geographic community. But being a graduate student within the Urban Education Leaders Program has really helped me feel incredibly compelled to do more outside of those parameters. And so that over time has really manifested in 3 ways for me. One, you know, as I think about the idea of social entrepreneurship, because a lot of, you know, what I do is essentially support and build capacity of schools, of nonprofits and businesses. I'm doing it for a social aim, a social reason, and always for social impact. And so I think a lot about what it means to intentionally invest and really challenge not only the face of philanthropy, but the undergirding principles of philanthropic giving, to interrupt the idea that it is only predominantly white and that is not Black and brown, to challenge the idea of what it means to also incorporate restorative justice within philanthropy. And so our consulting agency actually dedicates a significant percentage of our consulting revenue back into Black and brown initiatives every single month as an enduring commitment. And so in a lot of ways, we see it as recycling to help folks launch their own ventures. Sometimes we're directly writing checks to classroom teachers to get done the things that they need to without all of that red tape, right? Sometimes it is seeking to be a blessing to a family in dire need that's not necessarily able to afford health insurance. So, I've seen the power of giving just be tremendous for my entire team. But that way of thinking was illuminated for me at TC because I began to learn about and understand the depth of the racial wealth gap and what it meant for Black and Brown folks to not only be entrepreneurs, but to really fight for what we rightfully deserve in that space. I think a second way that TC has really pushed me is to be ever so unafraid to use my voice on a whole different, larger platform. I really have intentionally begun to write op-eds and really began to connect with journalists. I had the opportunity to be interviewed by Time Magazine to discuss what addressing bias in classrooms has looked like. And that was a tremendous opportunity, but something that years ago I would have been afraid of doing for the sake of retaliation, honestly, as an educator in a system that is at will. And so for me, what it means to truly have my own and be my own person means that I can say also what I want to say and what I feel like is needed to say to affirm the right practices, but to challenge the status quo and to speak in a lot of ways, the idea of truth to power. And so I'm very intentional about engaging actively in all types of speaking engagements and encouraging my team as we are 100% POC or people of color team. Our whole team is actually Black, Middle Eastern, Latinx, and Asian American. And I take a lot of pride in having us occupy the spaces that we do. And I think all of us using our collective voice is also powerful to see what multicultural organizing actually looks like. And then the last thing I would say is that the capacity building that we're doing through our trainings is another way that I'm leaning into being more bold as a result of the things that I've learned at TC. We are working with companies as of late, like Amazon and Apple, and school districts that are private and some that are public that would have never knocked on our doors, honestly, before the George Floyd incident and before Breonna Taylor and all these things that have happened. And so I think in a moment of seeing not only unrest, but seeing so many institutions begin to ignite conversations they've never had before, I think that it is important that Black and Brown voices and curators and scholars and practitioners be amplified and brought to the forefront because if not, I see so many instances where our intellectual property is literally stolen, right? And so I think it's important to show the power of what is possible through our work. And so in that way, I see the work philanthropy and thought leadership and also capacity building as disrupting and dismantling systems of oppression as well.
I really believe that many of the solutions to the problems we face nowadays are in what Boaventura de Souza Santos call like the subaltern peoples, people who were dispossessed during the colonial process. And I have the feeling that the academic world still does not value enough those narratives, those stories, those knowledges. And so, I particularly in my own research and my academic path that is like very in the beginning, what I'm committed to doing is try and bring that discussion to this space and try to bring that knowledge to this space. So I talked about the podcast and we discussed colonialism and health. And in one of the episodes, one of our interviewees talks about, really defies how the humanitarian aid structure is built nowadays and how it really feeds on crisis. So you need to have crisis constantly in poor countries in order to keep that system going. And I started wondering really about like my own field of international educational development. So we have people from all over the country and from the world really being trained here to go work in those considered poor countries or underdeveloped countries. And to what extent the knowledge of those countries are being considered and valued in the training of those professionals. So if we are going to other countries to help them or to assist them on creating policies that can solve their problems, as we say, to what extent are we really valuing their local perspectives? And I think that in order to really find a solution that is productive and durable, we should be looking at the local perspective and the local knowledge. For me individually, I think that what I feel it's possible is to bring that conversation into this academic space that is very privileged, very important, and try to bring that questioning to other scholars and to other people and to the field as a whole. And in order to have, a more diverse space of discussion with different knowledge represented.
I think it is so important to ask the question of who is in the room, whose values are guiding the conversation and the decisions being made, whose voices are we hearing, who is at an inherent advantage and who is at a disadvantage in this discourse, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about who's having the conversation and from whose canon or lens are we believing there is truth, the quote unquote right way of doing things. Is there a right way? Are there multiple ways that we can be approaching and solving problems? So I think that's definitely one that has to do with like the framing of problems and how we engage in those conversations. I think there's a second part of this that is really, attuned to whether or not we are taking the conversations and having them with key decision makers. I think about folks who make policies. I think about folks who make laws. I think about folks that we vote into elected offices. Like I often think about superintendents of school districts. There are just so many gatekeepers who have the power to create conditions and climates that our students, families, communities, everyone experiences. And I think that sometimes the conversations are happening in silos, that we're not actually working alongside those folks to either shift their mindsets about things or really engage in what would be seen as a true partnership. And I think that until that happens, everyone is going to be in their own camp. And just doing their own thing. And I think therefore having a lot of different agendas at play at the exact same time. Last but not least, I think that there's something to be said around thought leadership that leads not only to collaboration, thought leadership that is inclusive, but thought leadership that also leads to change that is sustainable and accountable. Because I think so many initiatives that take place can feel very reactive. They can feel very temporal, and they can feel like Band-Aids, to this contrasting reality in which we would really be getting to the root causes. And I think some of the solutions that are generated are not really addressing the real systemic issues. And so I think the solutions have to be far more interdisciplinary, intersectional, and comprehensive, so that we can really wrap our minds and our work and our energy around all the different ways that we have to make collective change happen. I think the accountability piece comes into making clear goals, knowing who we're holding accountable, knowing how we're going to track these things, being able to also own the way that institutions have contributed to the very inequity that they should be fighting. That is not just about pointing the finger to see what someone else hasn't done. It is a both and of being able to call people in and out, but being able to to look ourselves in the mirror as individuals and as organizations and constantly interrogate our practices to be better. The other piece that's so critical too, because there's so much dialogue, right? Talk, a lot of it, right? And I think that if there were never another time where action should be emphasized, it is now. Because I think some of the conversations we are having, we have also had for years. And so I think people are at a point also in their tolerance where they really want to see concrete action and change, and recognize that dialogue enough is not enough. So I think the more we can balance the two, the better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also say that even though it might seem minimal, put the effort in doing what feels right for you. Like for me, like this research, it doesn't seem like I'm going to really change the whole institution or the curricula or whatever. But I mean, for me, it makes a lot of sense. And from the feedback we've been having from our podcast, people are saying, I needed to hear this conversation. I was missing this conversation in other spaces. Even if it's not like super huge, that can, have some impact.
I think you've both raised really great points, and it seems that you both agree. In order to be responsible citizens of our communities, we have to take action, right? No matter how big or how small that action may be. And we know that one of the ways that we can take active steps towards change is by upholding our civic responsibility of voting. So what would your advice be to folks about getting involved in protecting their own democracy, whether that be through voting or other advocacy efforts leading up to the elections and even after? What comes next?
Number one, this idea of being able to really search ourselves and, determine what values are most important to us. Being able, with a very sober mind, to also analyze the state of education, the state of our economy, the state of healthcare, the state of many different things. And, being able to reconcile what is actually needed, and therefore what leaders are carrying comparable values in platforms and agendas that will address those needs. Because I think that blind allegiance to anyone can be dangerous, and sometimes for different reasons, there's actually a ton of loss of hope at times, frustration, apathy. And to that, I think that there has to be a resurgence, of hope and unwavering belief that change is possible. I think a lot about my grandmother, who is well beyond 80 years old, who in her lifetime has literally picked cotton, has had to drink out of plenty of water fountains that said colored only, who in her lifetime has literally hit with a brick for the right to vote in Selma. All of this is stuff that she's experienced in her lifetime, but to also live to see the first Black president, to also live to see people of color on mainstream television is something that she would not have fathomed to be possible. Take a lot of hope from her. I think often it's easy to become cynical, to become bitter, to become hopeless, to say it's not possible. So I think there's a balance between really pushing ourselves to understand how progress takes place, that it's not linear all the time, that there are curves and there are all types of avenues to it, but that change is happening, and to not lose faith in the efforts that we're pushing towards day by day and passing the torch to the next person and even the next generation.
One very important thing nowadays is kind of educate yourself about really communication production. I go back to that because I think fake news has a lot to do with us not being aware that we might be reading a false information from both sides. And I feel like also participating politically is also a good way of learning more about really the context where you are and how things work behind the curtains. and what really is at stake, what rights are being cut out and that you don't even realize. Also, I would suggest one thing that I think it's vital for political parties especially is maintaining a strong and well-made grassroots work. How are you connecting people beyond the time of election? What kind of actions are being made with all spheres of the population? You know, how are you really connecting to those people instead of just during the election time trying to bring forth your ideas and hoping that everybody.
So there you have it, Charo. As you so beautifully said earlier, our TC students are not just the future, they are indeed the present. They are powerful forces in their own rights and making change every day. So I hope this has not only filled you with hope, but also with pride. Thank you so much for being part of today's podcast, and we look forward to continuing this work.
We need to continue discussing, opening the minds, and realigning the hearts of people, because that's what our work will be forever. It is important. This is the time. It is something that we owe it to our students, that they are able to feel that they have power, they have the message. They just need an outlet to send it out, and TC certainly empowers them in order for them to be able to do that. So I'm very happy for being part of this today. Thank you, Rosella.
And I'd like to share a special thank you to you, our inaugural audience. Thanks for listening. We hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes of our new podcast series, Alumni Voices, which you can find on the Alumni Relations website, tc.edu/alumni. If you would like to recommend a TC alum to be featured on a future episode, please let us know. Until then, keep up the good work.